I'd like to welcome you all to the May 8th meeting of the Vermont Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. We have a full agenda again this evening. We're going to start off with a welcome and opening remarks, and I'm going to ask our new panelists to introduce themselves, or actually himself. We've got a roll call coming up in our second segment. We have, hopefully you all have had an opportunity to review the meeting minutes from December 12th and be ready to provide any changes that you feel are necessary. We have, as far as our presentations, a NorthStar update on the Vermont Yankee site decommissioning activities. We're then going to be going to state agencies, including natural resources, the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Public Service Department, and any additional state agencies that have something to report. We will then have a panel question and answer on the NorthStar and state reports, followed by a public question and answer on NorthStar and state reports. And moving on to general public comments for people unable to stay to the end of the meeting. And following that, the committee that we have set up for reviewing and becoming familiar with federal nuclear waste policy will be presenting what they've been accomplishing here in the last period. We have the report on spent fuel policies principles working group and general public comments at 8:25 this evening, followed by hopefully an adjournment sometime around 8:45 with a meeting wrap up. So I'd like to start off by welcoming our newest panel members, David Eastman, who is from Guilford. I would like to ask David to introduce himself and provide us with perhaps a little bit of a background.
Okay. So I was appointed by the speaker and live in Guilford, been living in Vermont for about 6-7 years now. I'm retired from Procter & Gamble, where I spent 35 years primarily as a pharmaceutical toxicologist, and then the last maybe 5 to 8 years as a consumer products safety toxicologist. So my background, I got my PhD at University of California at Davis a good number of years ago, and in toxicology. So I think, while toxicology can be either a very broad or a very focused, mine is more focused on pharmaceuticals and actually just a few pharmaceuticals at that. But it also gave me 35 plus years of thinking about safety, fear, as it relates to consumer products and in contaminants. So I think I come from a fairly decent background to be part of this panel. And I was nominated by Sarah Coffey. So answer any questions, but that's sort of the elevator speech of my background.
Very good. Any questions for David before we move on to other new people, if there are some? And David,
it looks like Commissioner Tierney has her hand raised.
Yes, Commissioner Tierney.
I do. I was trying to choose between the hand waving and the raising to draw notice, but David, thank you so much for your service and your willingness to be on the panel. On behalf of Governor Scott, I certainly welcome you here, and always commend people for their public spiritedness. So let's hear from you frequently and loudly.
I hope so.
now I got to figure out how to lower my hand.
I can do that.
There we go.
I think you just did. I think you just did. There you go. Okay.
And David, I should have made clear too, I serve as the commissioner of the Department of Public Service, and these meetings, the NDCAP itself is a citizen-driven panel created by our legislature, as you well know. But in terms of where you fit in government and the like, you are attached, if you will, to the department. And so complaints and demands and the like all get directed to me. And then I see what we can do to answer the need.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So, so at this point, I think if I'm doing this right, Tony, and please steer me if I'm not, panel roll call to ascertain that we have the proper membership here. How do you go about that? Do you just sort down through, or do you want people to say hello or what?
We typically have people just briefly say hello. I guess we can start in alphabetical order. So from what I see, the alphabetically, the first panelist that we have here is Maddie Arms.
Maddie Arms, Town of Vernon representative.
Okay, Chris Campany is supposed to be here tonight. I'm not seeing him right now. Oh, wait, he just joined. Okay, hi, Chris. Next person down, Tricia Capolino is unavailable this evening. Next person is Corey Daniels.
Good evening. I'm Corey Daniels with NorthStar. I'm the manager of the spent fuel storage installation. Nice to meet you, David. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Corey.
Okay, and next is Emily Davis.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Emily Davis. I'm the Senate President Pro Tem appointee, and also welcome, David.
Thank you.
And okay, next we have David Eastman. You've already introduced yourself. Bill, yeah, okay. Bill Irwin.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bill Irwin. I represent the Agency of Human Services. I work as the Radiological Toxicological Sciences Program Chief at the Vermont Department of Health. I welcome you, David, and welcome back, Steve. Congratulations on your position as chair.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, next is Bob Leach.
Yes, here, appointed by the governor.
Okay. I don't know, is Brett Long here yet? I know he said he'd be joining late. I don't see him right now. Okay, moving on. Mark McDonald, I do not believe is here either. David Pearson.
Hi, David Pearson, Vice President of NorthStar. Steve, look forward to the year under your tutelage. David Eastman, welcome, and look forward to working alongside you. To the fellow panelists, looking forward to the rest of the year.
Okay, Marvin Resnikoff, I know, is absent this evening. Representative Laura Sibilia, I do not believe is here either, but we'll check that. Next, Mr. Chair, Stephen Skibnowski.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Steve Skibniowski, your new chair.
Okay. Commissioner Tierney.
Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, June Tierney here, Commissioner, Department of Public Service, and I jumped the gun, but I was so happy to see you, David Eastman, that I just couldn't help myself. So I don't think I need to say anything more.
Okay, and lastly, Lissa Weinman. I know was here.
I am. I'm here.
Oh, okay, there you go. You're not popping up.
Everybody's very jocular this evening. Let's hope it stays that way. I'm an citizen appointee from the Senate Pro Tem also, and I'm currently vice chair, I guess, of the panel as well. So welcome, David, and hi, everybody.
Okay, moving along, we do have confirmation of a quorum then, and now I'd like to review and approve the meeting minutes of the last meeting. If you could turn your attention to that document, copies of it were online, and hopefully you had a chance to review review those things. Tony, what do we do? We don't hopefully go through line by line, I'm assuming.
Oh, no. No.
Here.
Basically, if anyone has comments or they noticed an error on a typo, whatever in the minutes, we just ask them to point it out. I did notice a couple of minor items, but typically we ask the panel members if they have anything first before I go into those.
So any panel members have something to revise or add to the minutes of anything that you reviewed and felt that needed to be changed? Not seeing any hands up right now.
Okay.
So would you then go to the chair, I guess, right? Well,
Yes.
Just a minor thing on page 4, line 19. I believe that the word should be was.
So that was line 19?
Yes, line 19.
Yes. Okay, I see that, yes.
Pick that up too. Then there was one other area I had a question on, actually. Just a second, I'm thumbing through my written notes here. I'll get there in a minute. Taking a little longer. Oh, okay. I guess that was just another note to myself there. I think that covers it for me. It wasn't a lot. There was one follow item that I thought would be important, but we can address that under new business.
Okay. Okay. I did notice a couple of missing words reading through this afternoon. So on page 5 at line 22, which starts for spent fuel storage cost comparable, it looks like that should read are comparable because it was a question from Marvin. On the same page down at line progresses the line begins running out and continues dose sources decommissioning work progresses. That should actually read running out of dose sources as decommissioning work progresses. So we have 2 words to be added there. Moving on, first line of page 7, in the parentheses where it indicates since state had already filed comments on the ruling, it should be since the state, in other words, Vermont, had already filed comments on the rulemaking. And on page, where's the next one now?
At line 4 of that same page, before you go past to page 7, sure. I think the word vote should be inserted there between between A and was, if I'm right.
Yes. Okay. A motion to bring the IBAW comments endorsement to a vote. Yes, you are correct. That is one I missed. Okay. And I know I had one more here.
Line 27, page 8, perhaps?
It was on page 8. What line did you say? Line
27, page 8. I think the word to should be inserted between directed and published.
Yes. Okay. That's one I missed. And on that same page,
this one.
Yeah, on line 34 of page 8, it ends with as chair in 2022. It ends with a period. It should be a comma there. So change that period to a comma.
Very good.
And I believe that was everything that I found.
Yes, I didn't have anything else.
Yeah. And I'm just taking a very quick flip through. Yes. Okay. Yes, that was everything that I had found in my read through this afternoon.
At this point in time, are there any other recommended changes or additions or deletions to the minutes of December 2022 for this meeting?
Chris Campany has his hand raised.
Yes, Chris.
I was just going to make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Wonderful. I was just about to ask for. Yes.
Seconded.
Second.
Motion's been heard to approve. Was there a second?
Yes. I
Very
second.
good. Yes, Ms. Tierney, Commissioner Tierney seconded. Is there any further discussion on the minutes? Hearing and seeing none. I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye to accept the minutes as revised.
Aye.
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 Oh, I'm sorry, you held your hand up. Okay. I also, yeah. I'm going to get used to this, honest to God. I only
You're
have
doing
one eye.
great, Steve. You're doing
I only
great.
have one
well.
eye now, so
Really
I've got
well.
all these little boxes to watch for. And those opposed, say nay. And okay, and then anyone who is abstaining, say abstained.
Abstain.
Very good. Okay, David. And so the record, I don't know how many positives you've got A's, but no nays and one abstention.
That would be 10 yays and one abstention.
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you.
And nobody has died yet, Steve, so all's good.
Well, yeah, I'm a little nervous after all.
Don't you worry.
It's been a few years, you know. Okay, want to make sure we keep this momentum rolling as well, because I know everybody's really enjoying the spring here in Vermont, and I certainly am. Let's see here. The next thing we're going to be hearing from NorthStar, an update on the Vermont Yankee site decommissioning activities, and Corey Daniels will be heading that off. And Corey, you can start anytime.
Thanks, Steve. I'll just work with Tony for the presentation.
Very good.
Okay, you should be seeing it now. I hope.
Thanks, Tony. Next slide, please. All right, as always, and for anybody new or who hasn't attended before, NorthStar starts with very simple priorities with all the work we do. And that all begins with safety. Our mantra and efforts to achieve target zero extend into radiological, environmental, industrial, and nuclear safety. And the goal is to have no accidents and no errors, to do it right, to do it safe. Next slide, please. This is a macro view of the large elements of our overall schedule. I put this up pretty much at every meeting. Nothing has really changed on it at all. You can see across the top, the spent fuel management will continue basically indefinitely until the DOE makes good on its commitment and there's a place to send the spent nuclear fuel and the greater than class C waste. The site restoration and final stage status surveys and associated efforts should end sometime towards the end of 26. Large component removal, for the most part, is complete, and all the building and other large system deconstructions activities happen throughout the rest of 23, 24, and 25. Next slide, please. As far as our performance update, we kind of reset on our numbers for accuracy. We're still greater than 1.4 million person hours worked on site since we took over ownership in early January of 2019, without a single lost time OSHA recordable accident occurring to date. A couple of that with very good regulatory performance, no cited violations from the NRC to date as well for the entire decommissioning. Good testament to the prudent and conservative decision-making and strong technical conscience maintained by our staff. And as mentioned before, with the production, we stay well on schedule. We expect to be done quite a bit ahead of the 2030 required completion time. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of the turbine deck. Basically, you're looking at the hole beneath where the main turbine used to sit, and then the main condenser skirting, which was a very large, thick metal structure that went all the way around. This was about 3 feet tall and then hung down into those open holes. All that has been removed. At the very far end of the turbine deck, you see a fairly substantial cylindrical structure. That's actually the generator stator, and it's actually being cut in half at this point just because it's too large and heavy for the turbine building crane to lift to remove. But for the most part, all the materials inside the turbine building are being removed or put in a state in which it will support the demolition of the superstructure. And removing that condenser skirt was a pretty big milestone. Next slide, please. So that's a close-up view of that generator stator that I pointed out. If you look closely in the left-hand picture, you can see a very thin line going across the center. That's actually the wire of a diamond wire saw slicing through that generator stator into 2 pieces. Next slide, please. So this would be looking pretty much from the same direction as 2 slides back, but just off to your left-hand side. And what you can't see now is a large block wall that's separated out the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning rooms with all the equipment for the reactor and turbine building, all the large fans and ductwork, and all that's been removed. We're really just down to the frame of the turbine building superstructure on this level. Next slide. There are activities happening in the turbine building, stripping out all the conduit and all the electrical equipment that has long since been retired, just to make the building easier when we perform the demolition, to not have to sort through all the materials. Next slide. And again, you can see to the extent for which we removed systems, including piping that was embedded into the turbine basement floor. That trench that you see the gentleman standing in was cut open, and we actually stripped the floor drain piping out of the lower level of the turbine building basement. Next slide. Additionally, the last of the large components that were inside of the turbine building, what you're looking at there are pretty much the blocks from the large Fairbanks Morse diesel generators that were our emergency power supply energy sources. Those are effectively train engines, and those have basically been stripped right down to the metal blocks themselves for demolition and scrap and recycling. Next slide. Additionally, outside and around the turbine building, the last couple remaining components, including the startup transformers, were also removed. All the copper that could be was taken for recycling, and the remainder was basically demolished and crushed up so it can be disposed of. Next slide. That led us to the exterior work, which included removing all the exterior paneling and the insulation. The green was the original paneling on the exterior. You can see where the large personnel lift is. The brown section is what the insulation looked like in between, and the whole rest of the exterior of the turbine building that's now gray. That's actually the outside of the inside paneling, which is also to be removed just prior to the demolition of the building. But you can see that the turbine building's pretty close to being ready to be demolished. Next slide. And that's just a shot from around the other side, and you can actually see into the structure. Next slide. And from the north end, we actually got some of the panels removed, and that is actually open to the environment now. So you get an idea for the scale just by looking at where the administrative building that used to exist on that lower level, and those are full-size personal access doors on the bottom of that picture. Next slide. Additionally, the roofing membranes being removed as well. Again, all these items that are being removed have been tested and sampled for hazardous materials, lead, PCB, other things that would require the special handling, and this roofing material is all being pulled up and being removed. Over 1 acre is the size of that roof. Next slide. So getting away from the turbine building and now into the reactor building. This is the floor above the ground floor. And if you had seen this building before, this floor was full of equipment, including the recirc motor generators and quite a bit of ventilation equipment. And as you can tell, looking at it now, it just looks like a big wide open space with large concrete columns. That's pretty much all that's left. Next slide. And again, this is the next floor up. Similarly, all the large system and component piping is being removed. What we're looking at here is what was once the reactor building closed cooling water circulating system piping and the associated heat exchangers that allow the surface water to cool those. Those are all being removed as well. Next slide. So these pictures are a little bit small to see on your screen, but the scale of this room is enormous. This is actually the Taurus. There's a large donut-shaped containment tank that was known as the wet well, or what would absorb all the energy in the event. But that when the reactor was running, it had an issue or could not be shut down. That tank is now over 50% completely removed. It will be more than 2.5 million pounds of steel removed out of that very lowest level of the reactor building. That upper right-hand picture to your left, the circular sidewall of the structure is actually the very base of the containment structure where the reactor and the containment vessel above it was held. But all that equipment is coming out in pieces and being taken away, and the rooms are all being emptied out. That'll continue on for the next couple of months. Next slide. So between the reactor and turbine buildings off to the east and a little bit to the south, significant excavations have occurred to expose and remove the 78-inch piping that held some of the ventilation and other systems that went between the turbine condenser and the advanced off-gas structures. And all those materials have been removed. And a lot of that has already been taken back to grade. But that excavation and sub ground level work will continue on. Next slide. Waste transportation. I'm running out of new and exciting photos to show at these meetings. There's only so many different types of train cars and rail shipments that occur. But you can see various assortment here of the different types of materials leaving the site, and that continues in earnest. Next slide, please. A little roll up of the shipping and material volumes. We're still shipping 3 to 4 rail cars a week. That's a pretty steady average. We're now over 600 shipments to date, and we're approaching 70 million pounds of material having left the site, safely transported to Texas. And again, the total activity count down there is continuing to creep up. It's about 36,000 carries now. There are a few items left that have some carry content to them. A reactor building has some equipment in it, a cleanup heat exchanger, some demons, and a couple other components, and some of the associated piping that's inside of the containment. But for the most part, as we mentioned in the meeting minutes from the last meeting, we are running out of significant quantities of radionuclides to ship off site, and it's only becoming safer, and the site is becoming cleaner. Next slide. All right, what else is happening? I won't read the whole slide to you, but we have one more action plan approved for small excavation. As we continue, it's an iterative process to sample and determine if we have any additional locations that require remediation. We did find one small spot that looked like it had some probably diesel fuel oil spilled in it at one point. And Then the split sampling that continues for post-demolition surveys correlate and show data that makes sense and no real surprises or issues from a non-radiological standpoint. And we've taken a few of the wells that are close to the footprint for the demolition of the facility and close those out and abandon them properly with a contractor who specializes in that. And that's really just a prudent decision to make sure we don't have incidental communication from some of the demo activities as we progress through that. Again, we're working through the post demolition groundwater monitoring program to determine the sampling. Some of that's spelled out in the MOU that we'll continue that for 3 years. And we were able to work through with the agency's assistance and get the general permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer and the streetmart permit from the Agency of Natural Resources. So we thank all the support we get on the bi-weekly calls and the coordination with Graham Bradley and the other folks who facilitated the continued efforts. Next slide. And again, one more photo of removal of some of the non-structural block walls with some of the specialty equipment that we use inside the term building. But we always close out again with our target zero. Remind folks that we're continuing through the decommissioning safely and showing good success and progress. And I'll pause there for any questions.
We do have a segment scheduled at 7 for specific questions on this topic as well as the state agencies. But I suppose if there was something that someone had, especially on the photographs, please chime in now. Yes, Lisa.
Corey, how many people are, on an average working there every day at this point?
Listen, that varies and it fluctuates a little bit, but with the teams that are in there right now, we average around 100 people on site and on any given weekday.
Wow. And one other question just regarding the groundwater monitoring regime as per the MOU. Does that mean that when other nuclear plants are demolished that they don't, that's something that was special to our situation? Is that something that's not required in other decommissioning sites? Because you mentioned it was per the MOU, and I'm just wondering, is that above and beyond what normally would occur at another decommissioning site?
So there's a bunch of answers to that question, Lisa, but I think in general, what you're asking are, do we have anything unique or any special arrangement? And I would say, no, it's pretty standard. My understanding is most states will require some type of monitoring program. There is an effluent report, and we're required just by the nature that the ISFSI or the Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation, to not use acronyms, will remain, even though it's a zero effluent facility. We would still do some level of monitoring, and that's consistent with my understanding of other facilities that have completed decommissioning, at least for some time period, to demonstrate that the data that was used to determine that the decommissioning is complete sustains the information that it concluded that.
And one final question, just regarding the when years ago when they were found to be a tritium leak from some of the pipes below ground, have you been in that area yet, or is that still to come?
Absolutely. Listen, there's been monitoring, I'll say down gradient, and for years since that event happened in 2010 or was identified. And a lot of those excavations that I showed you in that courtyard area are very close to or in the same vicinity as where that occurred.
I see. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good questions.
Very good. If you do have additional questions, please keep them, and we will get to them at 7 o'clock when we look at or when we have questions and answers on both NorthStar and state reports. So moving now, unless someone has something urgent, on to the state agencies updates on Vermont Yankee decommissioning. And first we'll hear from Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Graham Bradley. So Department of Environmental Conservation is within the Agency of Natural Resources, but most of the programs involved with the decommissioning are within the DEC, and including the division I work for, which is the Waste Management and Prevention Division, and the Sites Management section. So specifically, I'm the manager of a number of sites investigating ground contamination and remediation. And our role is to ensure compliance with the various relevant regulations, and also compliance with the 2018 Memorandum of Understanding between NorthStar and the state of Vermont. So every couple of weeks, I organize a meeting with NorthStar, with their consultants, Haley and Aldrich, and with other Vermont agencies, Department of Health and Public Services as well. When we get an update, similar to the ones in little more detailed than the ones you're getting tonight, perhaps, but not so many photographs usually. So it's nice to see those photographs on the NDCAP meetings. And so where I'm overseeing non-radiological, we're just responsible for potential non-radiological contamination and characterization of the site. It's the nuclear NRC that deal with the radiological side of things. So generally speaking, early on in the project, there was a big study done of potential areas of non-rad contamination. Those were investigated, and areas of actual contamination found, of which there were relatively few. There was a groundwater monitoring program put in place. And as buildings are demolished around the site, we're overseeing the work. There's post-demolition surveys, procedures agreed with NorthStar and Haley and Aldrich to go ahead with those, see if there's any contamination that wasn't identified during the initial investigations is identified after demolition. Where there has been the areas of contamination associated with above ground and underground storage tanks, we have corrective action plans put together by Haley and Aldrich, again on behalf of NorthStar. And as those areas become available following demolition, excuse me, they'll be moving forward with remediation of those areas. I'm also the point of contact for other permitting programs within the DEC, and I will speak to that as we go through. Next slide, please, Tony. So we did, I personally reviewed the groundwater monitoring report from last year. There's now been 3 years of groundwater monitoring. There was initially 70 wells in place to look at the groundwater flow directions and look at non-radiological contaminants of potential concern around the site. Of those wells, only 19 had identified contaminants of concern, and so they were monitored for another year, and only 4 of those wells actually had contaminants above the Vermont standards for groundwater. And so those were continued to be monitored for another year. The type of contaminants that were identified, again, associated with mainly with fuel storage, above ground and below ground storage tanks, VOCs, volatile organic compounds associated with petroleum.
on-site polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, again, hydrocarbon contamination, and PFAS. You may have heard of these as, what are they referring to them as? They're basically these long-term contaminants, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, forever chemicals. That's what the papers sometimes call them, and the media sometimes calls them. These were all relatively small impacts, but above Vermont standards. And I did ask for further sampling of wells that were still available to look at trying to delineate those relatively low levels of PFAS in groundwater. They appear to be associated particularly with the old leach field on site. This is not an uncommon occurrence. We've seen it at schools, ski resorts, various places. These contaminants are associated with waterproofing, with floor waxes, with various substances commonly used, and they tend to accumulate in the leach field. So we'll be monitoring those during the decommissioning process. So, excuse me, because we're getting close to demolition now of the turbine hall and eventually the reactor building, Haley and Aldrich did request that they close the wells in those areas. They're probably going to get damaged anyway, and we'd rather close them properly and seal those so they don't provide a route for contaminants to move and migrate. And then once the demolition activities are completed and those soil remediation activities are complete, there is a program to reinstall wells so we can then monitor groundwater after those activities are complete. And so the consultants, Haley and Aldrich, will be providing us with a post-completion or post-demolition monitoring plan for our approval. So we'll be looking again at areas that have been remediated and looking again at the PFAS issue around the leach field. Next slide, please. Okay, so no change here. These are corrective actions that I described previously. Again, around the storage tanks, we're waiting for the buildings to be removed so we can get, or Haley and Aldrich and NorthStar can get access into these areas and excavate that contaminated soil. They will then be under and we'll be observing over their shoulder. They'll be then doing confirmatory soil sampling. If it happens that there is contaminated soil left, that will be removed. The stockpiles will be managed on site to prevent covered while analyses are undertaken to determine the level of contamination, and then that will be disposed of off-site and clean soil brought into those excavations. So these are the corrective actions that we have approved. Those are not scheduled yet until, as I say, until those areas become available, until after demolition. Next slide, please. So even areas where the site investigation did not identify contamination, there are a number of areas with potential sources of non-radiological contamination that are being surveyed following demolition, just as a double check to make sure there's no obvious signs of contamination. In the last few months, the chemical laboratory drain line was exposed and excavated, and Haley and Aldrich surveyed that area, visual olfactory evidence, also a photoionization detector looking for hydrocarbons in those areas, and took soil samples for a suite of potential contaminants, VOCs, PAHs, metals. And Atlas, our consultants, were on site during that, and also took split samples, soil samples, to confirm that there were not contaminants above, no contaminant to soil found above the Vermont standards or above the background concentrations for the site. Corey already spoke about the transformer pads. The photo he showed you, transformers were still there. The photo on the bottom left there is when, during my site visit, both of these photographs, by the way, were taken 2 weeks ago. During my site visit, we do visits the site every few months to check on what's happening and make sure that we're familiar with the different areas and the operations on site. Following removal of the transformers, there's basically like a concrete box below those to capture any contaminants. Observations were made of that gravel within that box, and no evidence of staining or other evidence of contamination below the transformers. But also, just to make sure, Haley and Aldrich did sample the soils outside of that concrete box as well, and we're just waiting for the results of those analyses to come back now. So there's various areas remaining where there'll be further post-demolition surveys done associated with storage tanks, demolition of turbine building, rand waste building, transformers, and a hazardous materials storage area. So those will be coming up in the next few months to year or two as we move, as NorthStar move forward with the demolition and decommissioning. Next slide, please. So these are the other permit programs within DC. So these are, I'm the point of contact, so I'm less familiar with the ins and outs of some of these programs and with their specific regulations. I can just go through them quickly. The hazardous waste program, Will Sissons regularly joins our bi-weekly calls to ensure he's up to date with what's happening on site. They have various categories for hazardous waste generators. The site is now regarded as a small quantity generator. The residuals program, Eamon, manager of that, has overseen the final sampling. By residuals, by the way, what I mean is the biosolids. They had a license to spread the biosolids from the septic tank on the field south of the site. That was carefully sampled and monitored, including groundwater monitoring around that. Those results came back below the Vermont standards, and so that program has officially authorized sort of end of certification for that field. So no biosolids from the septic tanks are no longer allowed to be spread in that area. There's ongoing routine compliance for the drinking water well on site, although there's still a direct discharge permit to the river. I don't believe that's currently being used. Part of some of the wells that were sealed and decommissioned were part of a dewatering program in the bedrock around the turbine hall basement, and they were permitted to discharge through that license, but actually those wells are now gone. Stormwater program, I don't believe there's any update there. The rivers program, as NorthStar mentioned, as Corey mentioned, there was a the state stream alteration permit was issued on May the 2nd. And that's essentially to say that the state agrees with the plan to demolish and reinstate the riverbank at the intake structure and the discharge structure along the bank of the Connecticut River there. And the air emissions program have decided that, well, the temporary generators have been removed from site, and so there's no longer a requirement for an updated air emissions permit for the site. And I believe that's my last slide. Yeah. So I'm happy to take questions after we've either now or after we've heard from the other state agencies.
If there aren't any pressing questions, I'd like to move on to the Public Service Department's report. Okay, here we are.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eric Guzman. I'm an attorney with the Vermont Department of Public Service within the Public Advocacy Division. And also joining me on the call is Nicholas Kapik and Mark Amir. They're both the department's financial and technical consultants for the Vermont Yankee Decommissioning Project. The purpose of my presentation here is just to provide an update on the current funding to complete decommissioning and site restoration for the project, and provide an overview of the department's role, provide confirmation of project progress to date, and provide an update on the received annual financial submissions from NorthStar. Next slide, Tony. So I include this slide in every presentation, but this is just as a quick review for the department's role in the decommissioning process for anyone new joining. The department is charged through the 2018 Memorandum of Understanding approved by the Public Utility Commission to conduct an ongoing review of the decommissioning by evaluating the financial performance and the technical progress. On the financial side, the department reviews the financial performance of the project, including cash flows. The department analyzes the financial health of NorthStar and its corporate affiliates, as well as assesses the viability of the financial assurances that are contained in the MOU, which include the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust and the Site Restoration Trust, among a few other financial assurances. On the technical side, we confirm that the work performed by NorthStar is reasonable and consistent with withdrawals on that Nuclear Decommissioning Trust and Site Restoration Trust. We also evaluate the project to identify any risks or concerns that could challenge successful completion of the project. As part of the department's review, the department receives reporting from NorthStar on a monthly and annual basis, which includes a decommissioning progress report, updated project schedule, as well as pay item disbursement and earned value reporting, which are part of the financial documents we receive. The department also receives a 30-day notice of intended disbursements from the Site Restoration Trust for any site restoration work directly. We also receive notice of 30-day notice of withdrawals on the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust as well. We conduct monthly meetings with NorthStar for any follow-up requests on the monthly and annual reporting that we receive. We also have monthly meetings with A&R for further discussion and review of project progress, specifically the site restoration piece of it. The department's consultants conduct regular site visits every few months to verify project progress. And finally, while much of the financial reporting that receive is confidentially designated, all of the publicly available reporting that we receive is, which includes the NDT and SRT balances, a high-level pay item disbursement summary, and the annual public report are published on the department's Vermont Yankee decommissioning page. Next slide, please, Tony. So just starting with the annual reporting requirements, the 2018 Memorandum of Understanding requires that NorthStar file two things on each calendar year on March 31st. And those are the annual public certification and certain financial disclosures. The first one, the annual public certification, is submitted to multiple state agencies, including the Department, ANR, Department of Health, and the Vermont AG's office. And the annual financial disclosures are submitted directly to the department. And I'll just go over in the next couple of slides what each of these reporting requirements consist of. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for the annual public certification, Section 2H of the MOU requires 4 primary pieces of information. Those are a public report that contains a detailed description of all work completed as of the end of the preceding calendar year, pursuant to any corrective action plans approved by ANR, as well as a detailed description of remaining corrective actions and site restoration work. And I believe Graham went over a good bit of the corrective action plan reporting that occurred this past year. And then there is the report. The report also contains the available site restoration trust balance for the end of 2022, which as of December of 31st of 2022 was a little over 51 million. And the report also states that the estimated work to complete site restoration is just short of 12 million. And again, that report is available on the department's NDCAP page. Next slide, please, Tony. So for the financial disclosures that the department receives under the MOU, the department receives audited financial statements from NorthStar Group Holdings and NorthStar Group Services, Inc., which are both parent companies to the licensed decommissioning entities here. We also receive audited statements of the Nuclear Decommissioning and Site Restoration Trust, fund balances, and an accounting of the disbursements over the past year. We also receive a schedule of the projected fund activity for the site restoration and NDT throughout the completion of partial site release and site restoration. And we also receive a variance analysis of actual disbursements to estimated disbursements in the prior year's reporting. And so we received all of these documents as required under the MOU by March 31st. Next slide, please, Tony. So this slide just contains a list of disbursements from the NDT and SRT since the NDCAP's last meeting in December. Prior to withdrawing from either trust, NorthStar provides the department the 30-day notice that I mentioned, and the department has the authority to object to any disbursement from the SRT within the 30-day timeframe if there's any sort of inconsistency with the amount requested against the work performed. Additionally, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission receives a 30-day notice of disbursements from the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust, and the department receives a copy of that on a monthly basis. And as of March 31st, the NDT balance was roughly 162.5 million, and the SRT balance is roughly 51.3 million. And all disbursements from these trust funds are for work already completed. Next slide, please, Tony. So this slide contains a table of the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust and Site Restoration Trust balances since November of 2022. And below that table, I have a summary of the type of work with the estimated amount for that work to be completed. So for the first category, we have license termination activities. Those total 500, and I should explain, license termination activities encompass the safe removal of radioactive material and the removal of the Vermont Yankee facility itself. And that totals $536.2 million. As of the end of March, $368.2 million of that work has been done and earned by NorthStar, leaving $168 million remaining to complete license termination work. So the current Nuclear Decommissioning Trust balance is at $162.5 million. I'll provide a little context for that apparent discrepancy in the next slide. I discussed this at the December NDCAP, but I'll provide an overview on the next slide. We also have the spent fuel management costs, which are $290.9 million, with NorthStar having earned $28 million as of March 2023, leaving $262.9 million to manage spent fuel until its removal. NorthStar anticipates collecting approximately $276.5 million from the United States Department of Energy for spent fuel management costs. And then the site restoration costs, which encompass the cleanup of any non-radiological contamination to satisfy Vermont and federal standards, totals approximately $25 million. NorthStar to date has earned, as of March 31st, has earned $13.5 million, leaving $11.5 million required to complete that work. The site restoration fund, as of March 31st, contains $51.3 million. Next slide, please, Tony. So our consultant from 4 Points Group conducted a site visit in February 2023, which included observation of work activities within the turbine building, reactor building, refueling floor, and the outside areas near the turbine and reactor building. No conditions during that site visit in February were inconsistent with project progress that was reported by NorthStar in its December and January reports. Our consultant also conducted a site visit in April, end of April of this year, and we'll be receiving a report regarding that progress shortly. And then regarding the NDT balance versus the remaining license termination activities, the NDT balance is reflective of current market conditions, which assume an unrealized loss on the NDT and does not account for continuing quarterly interest payments on the Treasury securities that the NDT is invested in. The NDT is invested exclusively in U.S. Treasury securities with laddered maturity dates. As those securities approach maturity, the value normalizes. So that unrealized loss that is reflected in the current NDT balance would only be realized if those securities were sold prior to the maturity date. NorthStar has a practice of selling those securities upon their maturity. So unrealized losses have not occurred, and we do not expect them to. So the value of the NDT without those unrealized losses on securities is $165.9 million. Additionally, the NDT does not account for continuing interest on the NDT, which will meet the remaining value needed for license termination work. The NDT receives a quarterly interest payment that should meet that balance. Finally, as a reminder, the 2018 MOU also has certain financial assurances if there is a need for any additional funding beyond the NDT for license and site restoration work. That includes a $140 million support agreement from NorthStar's parent company, as well as a $55 million financial assurance escrow. And both of those funds are to be used if there is any need for additional funding for license termination or site restoration expenses. And then finally, based on the last approved schedule provided by NorthStar in the recent annual reporting, the estimated work completed is reasonable, and NorthStar appears to be on course to complete the project within available funding. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Are there additional presentations by any state agencies? Not hearing any. We can move now to panel questions and answers on the NorthStar and state reports section. Does anyone have any questions or input to this part of the agenda? It's quite comprehensive from my perspective, at any rate. Hearing none, I suppose.
Oh, wait a minute. I had my hand up.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Yes, I looked first time.
Sorry, I jump around. I had a couple questions. Maybe they're just newbie questions, but I was curious as to, there's a fair number of discussions, particularly I noticed them in Graham's, about reports or plans or, that go to that either the department creates or gets. I was wondering if those are available to panel members.
Graham, do you have any input on that?
That's a good question. I took over this position last year. I know with other regular sites, we have an online archive. Reports provided to us are public information. Let me look into the best way of providing, final reports reviewed. See what has been done previously before I took over, and look into the best way of providing that information.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to degranulate some of your conclusions and statements, just for my own curiosity, but also to better understand what you're saying, to get down to analytes and, what their levels actually are and detection limits and all those details that I'm used to thinking about.
I'd be happy to.
I think Tony can perhaps provide a source of information for all of us if you wanted to communicate those things to Tony, and then he could put them on someplace where we could all access them. I think that would be interesting.
I've been watching these. I went and watched these meetings from last year and skimmed through some of the final reports, and I'm not sure there's enough, information of what I see either in the presentations to know exactly what I'm looking for. I just pop up with, all the levels were below, and then in a report, and it's like, okay, so what actually was measured and what were the levels, especially as they start getting into levels of concern.
Sure.
I'm also kind of curious, you mentioned Vermont standards. A lot of those, mostly, are there different drinking water standards in Vermont versus groundwater? Or what exactly are those standards? And how do they compare in Vermont versus EPA, especially PFAS and the proposed new, I think they're still proposed new standards that's been getting a lot of press lately.
Yeah. First of all, it's a pleasure to have someone ask these questions.
Well, thank you.
Happy to provide that information and talk about the details. In Vermont, we regulate, groundwater is in the public trust, and we actually regulate groundwater for the main part as if it's all drinking water. I know
Okay.
the states sort of have different categories of groundwater, depending if it's an aquifer or a non-aquifer. We don't actually do that in Vermont. It's all treated the same. And I've actually just been looking at comparison of Vermont standards with EPA RSLs. Generally speaking, they are comparable, and perhaps where there's a risk-based RSL that for whatever reason it's decided more practical to have a different value for the MCL, then we adopt that MCL, which is the drinking water standard. For our groundwater standard, generally speaking. For PFAS, as you probably know, since you brought it up, the sort of guidance value of the EPA has been 70 parts per trillion for the handful of regulated PFAS compounds. In Vermont, for the last, 4 years now, we've been regulating 5 particular PFAS compounds to 20 parts per trillion.
Total or individually?
Individually or together. The main ones being PFOA and PFOS, but also 3 others as well. And as you're probably aware, there's a proposal to bring the drinking water standard down, EPA, the federal standards down, and that is a proposal out for discussion at the moment. So depending on the compounds, it could actually be reduced from 70 down to 4 or 10, depending on the compounds. And so I'm very familiar with that at other sites. And so, it would be our drinking water program that would be addressing that initially if those are adopted. And it would work through the program, it would work through internally, DEC, and discussions about that and how that would be translated into the groundwater regulations if and when that happens.
Okay. I think this question may be more for Corey, but I was curious, again, hitting the non-rad hazards. You talk about ship.
You're breaking up.
I'm sorry. Let's see if this gets a little better. I'm curious as to sort of, and maybe you can't do it in a answer, but maybe you could focus on this in one of your next reports, is how much waste is shipped off site as hazardous, non-rad hazardous materials, and what those are.
David, that is something we track and manage for the most part. Everything that's leaving the site now is leaving either as rad or mixed. We have very few things left that would meet the criteria that you're suggesting, but that is something that I'm sure I can work with our shipping folks and get some detail on if you're interested.
Yeah, I'd be curious, both what you've done and if you anticipate any more of the non-rad hazardous waste being shipped off-site.
Got that captured, and we'll try to put something together that satisfies that query.
Thanks, Corey.
Any other, are you all set there, David, or did you have something?
I think so, yeah.
Good. Are there any other questions from the panel on the topics that were covered here under the NorthStar and state presentations that we can cover now? I do want to just editorially note that it would, if there does become a source where we can actually go and look at this kind of information, it would be good to have it posted somewhere that we could access as panel members. I don't have as much background in some of these areas as some folks do, but certainly my background would cause me to be interested in some of those elements. So that would be helpful, I think, to everybody. So if there are no more questions on those two presentations, if we could move forward now with questions from the public on the NorthStar and state reports. Are there questions from the public participants to those entities that they would like to step forward and say something? This is your chance, folks, okay? Well, I'm hearing none, I guess, at least not yet. I guess we can then move on to our next agenda item, which is early general public comments for people unable to stay to the end of the meeting. Are there any early general public comments for people who can't stay till the end of the meeting? I'm looking for hands up. And I don't see any on my my voluminous information panel here. So I guess moving on then from that, if there's no hands for that, then we move on to the presentation from Lissa concerning the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee update. And I know that she's been active. I actually sat in on one of the presentations that was given, I think it was in March. Is that correct, Lissa?
March 6th, yes.
Very good. And was quite fascinated with the good speakers. So Lissa, you have the floor.
Yeah, and Tony and I hadn't really gotten together because I think, Tony, are you going to be talking about the San Onofre group?
Yeah, that's if you look at the agenda, the item at
Okay, I just wanted to
8:05. Yes.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I think that's important. So yeah, I'm Lissa Weinman, and I've been chairing the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee along with the members of the committee. And David, if you're interested, we would love to have you as a committee member too. You really learn a lot, as we all are learning as we go forward. So Maddie Arms, Corey Daniels, Marvin Resnikoff, and Tony are all committee members. We do our monthly, quarterly at this point, meetings and try to keep abreast of federal developments on the storage, hopefully one day, of the spent nuclear fuel that is currently in casks at BY, making us a de facto interim storage facility for the spent fuel. On March 6th, we had a very interesting committee meeting. We were looking at changes that may or may not be required to the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, as amended in 1986. Though that legislation really forms the bedrock of what happens or does not rather happen right now with federal spent fuel policy, nuclear waste policy. So to that end, we actually usually do hour-long meetings quarterly, but we made a 2-hour meeting, and we had two experts sort of coming at this issue of whether or not consolidated interim storage facilities are in fact legal. And if so, what would need, if not, what would need to change? And it was a very productive discussion. We had Jay Silberg, who's an attorney for the industry, very long time, very well-versed. And we had Diane Curran, who's another attorney who kind of comes at this from a different angle. And if the video is available, obviously, for everybody to take a look at, but it was very illuminating in terms of different points of view about what might need to happen in terms of that law actually changing to allow for some of the consolidated interim storage facilities to actually occur. And there was a lot of disagreement there, so it was interesting for us to note. I would say that the next meeting that we're going to have will be on June 12th. And we were going to use the same kind of format where we had sort of a pro and con over a 2-hour period. But the speakers that we've identified can't really do that together. So we're going to actually do our next meeting as planned on Monday, June 12th at noon with Dr. Sven Bader. And he is the principal investigator for Orano. Corey, I'm not sure how to even pronounce it. But the topic is recycling of nuclear waste, which is something that's been coming up more and more. And we thought it was important as a committee that we get a handle on what exactly we're talking about when we're talking about recycling or closing the nuclear fuel cycle. So the other person who will be coming to Sven is very high on recycling. He is working with Orano on a $2.2 million DOE grant, which seeks to reduce looking at technologies to reduce the waste stream from nuclear power. It's part of the ARPA. It's advanced reactor technologies DOE is trying to invest in. So we'll hear from him about recycling, which has been controversial in the past. It has not really been done in the United States for a long time on the level that is now being anticipated. So we're curious as to what the promise and the pitfalls of that might be. And since we can't have Dr. Bader and Dr. Edwin Lyman, who's with the Union of Concerned Scientists, he's the director of their nuclear safety program. He is an acknowledged expert nationally on recycling and spent fuel storage. So we are going to have him on June 19th for an hour and a half presentation. So, we can't do it together, but we're going to do it the next week. And one of the things that I think it's important is that we offer these experts who come in an honorarium, and we hadn't really discussed that, but we have a budget for that that we discussed when Emily was chair, and we got our annual stipend for committee panel activities, really. But so that's something I think that we need to vote on, whether or not it's appropriate that we can offer these experts an honorarium, which by no means is a payment for them, because they would cost a lot more if we were to actually be paying them. But just to actually offer an honorarium for their time and input, I think is the least we can do. They provide quite a bit of benefit to us and to the public at large. So that's coming up in the next couple of weeks, this look at recycling. And I think, there have been no real reintroduction of bills in this Congress regarding consolidated interim storage facilities that might require a change of law or not, depending who you talk to. But we're taking a close look at that. And to that end, now we have Becca Ballant, who took Representative Welch's seat in the House. And she has just informed me that she is joining the Spent Fuel Solutions Caucus in the House of Representatives. So that's very good news. That's something that Representative Welch did not opt to do. And she is very interested in this issue. And she will be joining Representative Levin from Southern California, who really is motivated by the San Onofre nuclear station's casks right where the waves are breaking on the Pacific Ocean. So those guys are very motivated to try to move those casks. And they are driving a lot of the federal, this push to amend the legislation to allow for consolidated interim storage facilities. So we'll hear from Tony on that. And I'm very encouraged by Representative Ballant's interest in the issue, and we'll stay in touch with her. I know Tony and I sort of split these duties of seeing what was happening in the Congress at this point, so he can provide a little bit more background on that from his perspective, speaking with the San Onofre people. But I think that it's we're learning more and more. I would encourage other committee members to pipe in. I know Maddie's been very interested in the recycling question, and it is the big push right now. So I think we're right. As usual, the committee is doing the kind of investigation and offering the information that I think is useful to the panel at large. The DOE really has been finalizing its consent-based siting initiative, which it picked up from all the work that was done back in 2017 and then put on a moratorium. They've allotted $26 million for this program so that they can continue to try to get some consent from some community to actually want to store the nuclear waste, the spent fuel. And we'll see how that goes. But we also monitor DOE and stay in touch with them as part of the committee work. So I'm curious if there's any questions from the panel at this point. I'm happy to entertain them or have other members of the committee pipe in. Corey, if I've mischaracterized anything, please do pipe in. Maddie and Marvin's not here, but it would be great to hear from other committee members as well. And we will continue to meet quarterly in this fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lissa. I noticed Tony has his hands up, or his hand up rather. Finally, I figured that one out. Yes, what did you have to say?
Basically, all I wanted to add to that, as we finished up, as the committee finished up its March 6th meeting, there was some discussion on just getting a general status of a number of spent fuel policy related bills that had been brought before Congress in previous sessions. So in response to that question, I did do a search on the congress.gov website, initially just for bills that we had discussed at previous committee meetings. So these were bills that had been introduced in several of the previous Congresses. So like the 115th, the 116th, the 117th Congress. The current congressional session is the 118th session. None of those bills that had been discussed in previous Congresses have been reintroduced. There have been a few new ones introduced in the current Congress that, for the most part, appear to cover really getting Russia out of the nuclear fuel stream at this point. A lot of the fuel feed that is used in the United States right now is uranium that originally were Soviet Union nuclear weapons and Russian or uranium sources within Russia. And now the hope is with the introduction of some of these new bills that Russian uranium will not be used. Instead, we will turn to uranium from domestic sources. Related to this, just to since people on the committee had asked about this, I put together a short summary which is available in the meeting materials for tonight's meeting that just discusses or just outlines the bills that we had discussed previously and the bills that are out there right now in the current Congress. One bill from the current Congress that I wanted to mention, and bear with me for a moment, it's There has been a version introduced in the Senate as well as a version introduced in the House, and it is called the Nuclear Waste Informed Consent Act. And basically, what this is that any siting of a nuclear waste repository would need consent from the local community and the state where this repository would be sited before it can move forward. So there are a few details in the summary. For each of these bills, I include the link to the full text of the bill. So rather than simply relying on what I understood of the bills when I read through them, people can go back and read this on their own. A number of the bills already have their own summaries, so I largely plagiarize those, but some of the newer bills do not. So that is something, if you do go back to congress.gov website and search for these items, there will be additional information coming. It's just a question of when. So.
Very good. Thank you, Tony. David, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd be interested in joining the committee. I won't be, yeah, I'm good. I thought I was still on mute. If, I don't know whether there's emails, notices of when those meetings are that can go out, but if you send me, I'll at least start attending those and maybe officially down the road a little bit. I won't be around on the 12th. I'll be overseas. So,
well, all the committee meetings are recorded, and you could take a look at some of the past meetings, and we get
I'll do that.
We get a lot of people that come to the meetings that are from other decommissioning site, nuclear sites, Indian Point, so the information that we're generating, I think is useful beyond just our community. But of course, decommissioning is not completed until the spent fuel leaves the community. At least that's what NRC says. So, by Corey's timeline, we are going to be doing this, kind of oversight until at least 2051. So, and I saw Chris Campany's note that, yes, Becca Ballant will let us know what has legs and what doesn't. As we know, there's private initiatives that are occurring that the NRC has licensed for, there to potentially be a private initiative to move spent fuel and not have to adhere to the federal law. So that's what we're kind of grappling with in this committee is what's going to happen, what's legal, what's not, what's private, what's federal. And it's complicated, but it's very, very interesting. So we would welcome your participation very much.
Thank you, Lissa. Chris, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just briefly. And yeah, Lissa saw my comment for other people's sake. Sometimes bills get introduced and they look really good in congressional newsletters. And other times bills actually have the opportunity to move through the process. And that's why I brought that up, because otherwise you can, and I say this as a former federal policy organizer, like right where you try to have the bill have legs so it'll move through the process. But you can chase them ad infinitum and not really have much to say, but not much to account for at the end of the day. But the other thing, just to be mindful of, and Tony is probably most aware of this, is, and I think this is still the case, that under the Nuclear Regulatory Commission rules, they gave themselves the option of potentially leaving the spent fuel on site permanently.
Yeah.
And so it's always useful to also just see what the NRC is saying they're going to allow themselves to do. So I don't think there's been any change to that, but just something to be mindful of. And I'm sure the trade papers and everything else, would report on that. And I'm sure Tony is probably on top of whatever they're saying. I'm sure Corey is too. So.
Yeah.
But thanks for all your work on this, Liza.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that Congressman Welch had introduced that didn't have legs, but would have allowed for community compensation for the continued storage, similar to how NorthStar has to sue the federal government to get back some of the funds for spent fuel management. Welch's position was that the community has a right to get some compensation for playing the role of de facto nuclear waste storage facility as well. I don't know if Representative Balance is going to pick up that mantle, but I know that many other communities are interested in that kind of legislation.
Very good. Are there other comments or questions on this topic? Okay, I'm not seeing any at this point, at least by my chart here. However, Lissa, you mentioned a couple of things that we had discussed earlier about being an agenda item. I don't see a new business line item here, but certainly at some point, I think you've mentioned one, but I think the other one probably needs to be mentioned as well. And that has to do with stipends, I guess, and so forth. So I'm not, Tony, at what point should we introduce new business?
That's a good question. Certainly we can do it towards the end of the meeting. I'm trying to remember exactly what Lissa was
on there, but
yeah. Lissa, what was your other item? It's not in my head right now.
No,
I'm wondering maybe it's appropriate to bring it up here.
Well, there's a couple things. One is, may we go ahead and offer an honorarium to experts who address our committee? I think the answer is yes, we can, but I don't know what procedurally that requires from us. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up is, as citizen appointees to the panel, I've tried in the past to raise our stipend, and that has been refused. But I do feel that the committee meetings that we do we should also be able to apply for a stipend. Again, just like with the honorarium, this isn't payment. This is just a sort of an acknowledgement of the work that we all put in and the time that we put in to investigate these issues and provide this information, which ends up on our webpage to the panel. And I thought it was appropriate that, citizen appointees also receive a $50 stipend for each committee meeting that we run. So I wanted to bring that up. But the more important issue is, can we offer the experts the $200 honorarium for addressing our committee? And Tony, one last thing though, didn't San Onofre Group, they've created a national coalition. Didn't they want us to sign on to something or?
I can talk about that a little bit later, but basically what they're discussing isn't quite ready for public consumption yet. They're finishing it up. I was expecting that it would be ready by this meeting, but they're in another round of draft at this point. So, but I think they're close.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically, as I said, they have a very pressing issue. They have a different situation than we do here in Vermont, in that we feel reasonably assured that our casks are relatively safe, even though they're very close to the banks of the Connecticut River, and there could be flooding that occurs. In the case of San Onofre, not only are they in an earthquake zone, but they are really on the beach. I mean, it's a pretty bad situation, and they're very eager to move their casks somewhere, anywhere, to get it out of there. And although, of course, they're perfect, no one will say they're not safe, but that's sort of the undertone is to get them out of that situation. And so therefore, the San Onofre people in California and Representative Levin are very motivated on this issue of finding an interim storage facility. And I also just want to point out to people that nowhere is the DOE, which is in charge of all this, the Department of Energy, talking at all about a permanent nuclear disposal site. which I still can't really believe, but it's true. They keep talking about a temporary sites and expect communities to consent to be a home for these temporary interim storage sites. But DOE still doesn't really ever talk about Yucca Mountain or a permanent disposal site. And I don't really know what's up with that. But at any rate, that's where we stand. Maybe the DOE is hoping that recycling is going to be brought back and take care of that. But all the experts say we will still need, even if you recycled all the fuel tomorrow, there will still be an appreciable amount of even, more toxic, potentially waste that needs to be stored in a disposal facility, disposed of rather, in a deep geologic facility. So we'll keep monitoring this and applying it to how it impacts us here in Vermont. But that is expect that San Onofre will be coming to us, asking us to take a policy position with them.
Well, thank you, Lissa. Chris, you had a comment or a question?
Yeah, I hate to even do this, but just a point of order. I think, and I'm not a parliamentarian, any new business, I think, would have had to have been introduced at the beginning of the meeting. But your call, Chairman Steve, whatever you.
My intention was to have Lissa discuss this or at least present it, but to add it to our next agenda of the next meeting. That was what my intention was, because it wasn't warned. And Lissa and I had a conversation just recently about it, but the meeting agenda had been issued already. So my call would be that we put something like this on our agenda for our next meeting. That would be what I would recommend, unless the panel decides that that's not going to happen. At any rate, are there any additional comments or questions on that? June, please jump in.
Yes, absolutely.
I keep checking this thing on the side.
You're doing great. You are. And so I would suggest that when we warn this for the next meeting, that we also make a point, Tony, of circulating the statute that pertains to the use of our funding. I have in mind Title 18, Section 1700. And the two provisions that would be pertinent to this are subsection F, I think, which deals with the per diem that panel members are entitled to. And then the other is subsection G6 that deals with the hard fought and won $35,000 that the panel has on an annual basis for expenditures. One of which here is listed as other reasonable and necessary expenses of the panel that I, as commissioner, can authorize. And then meanwhile, to address Lissa's question about process, Chris, unless you have an institutional memory that I don't have about the bylaws and the like, I haven't been able to check them yet. I don't believe we've ever established a mechanism as a panel by which we would agree to how to judge expenditures. I know that, Emily, when you were chair, we had a budget that we agreed upon, and I think that was for last year, but we've not yet done that this year. Oh. And so, to the point, Mr. Chair, we may want to consider for next meeting maybe having that budget discussion, because we do need to resolve how we expect to spend, what to do when somebody has an expenditure to propose.
Very good.
Just by way of example, I hear Lissa saying, we should be paying honoraria for folks who present to, I gather, the subcommittee. And if that's the case, then I think the full panel probably should be, weighing in on whether that $35,000 budget should be used that way. At the end of the day, I think my discretion as commissioner, but I think all of you have worked with me long enough to know that I don't do unilateralism unless I absolutely have to. So I'd much rather get advice and input from the panel before making decisions like that. So my apologies if, Chris, I'm running afoul of the parliamentary process by extensively commenting in this fashion, just doing it to help people figure out which planet we're on in the universe. And as I said, Steve, you're doing a great job. And Tony, if you weren't able to get my comments down in real time, then let's go back to the tape and make sure that the agenda for the next meeting hits on the issues that I've raised.
Yeah, I have no problem. I just wanted to raise it just in case, because I know some groups are more particular about that than others. And the other thing I can't remember, can I add one thing to June's list just to help? Yeah. And Emily, maybe you remember off the top of your head. I'm just not remembering what our budget period is. Does it run with the state fiscal year? Does it run with the calendar year?
Yeah.
If y'all already know that may be a non-question, but I am not remembering off the top of my head. But I think we had talked about honoraria previously in a budget. I don't remember how it resolved, but anyway, yeah, all that's good stuff to talk about at the next meeting.
That's a really good point, Chris, because the statute only says that we have an annual $35,000, but it doesn't define the annual period. So to my mind, it would have been from the date that we approved the last budget, but search me.
I think in previous discussions, in early discussions, we kind of loosely adhered to a calendar period, but I think that there wasn't really a whole lot of intention or formality or thought behind that.
Well, Tony, we can certainly have a couple of things going for next agenda to address this. And so unless there's further questions for Lissa, there's now on the agenda.
I did have, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I did have one. Yeah, I had one question to ask. I guess, I don't know, maybe this would be best answered by the commissioner, or we can just take a step back. But the statute itself references that and I forget the date, but there's a specific date where the Public Service Commissioner is supposed to present a bill to NorthStar for the panel's expenses for the year. So I wonder if that actually sets, whether it is calendar year versus fiscal year, or is that something that the panel needs to determine?
So I see that in the statute now too, Tony, that you've brought it up. So good point. I am trying to put a bow on this, Mr. Chair, because it wasn't warned.
No, I apologize for that too. Yeah.
We'll sweep Tony's comment into the scope of everything that we've been talking about on a general basis.
Sure.
And I would suggest that I think, Tony, the point you're making is that by the next time we convene, if you're right, we'll already be a couple months into that next period, or 1 month into it, I guess. So time is of the essence here. Anyway, I'm just reminded that I was going to make the point that I'm supposed to present a bill to Vermont Yankee by June 30th annually. Mm-hmm. So that would be a strong indication of the budget cycle. And secondly, and that also happens to coincide basically with the state fiscal year. But in terms of mechanism, I think, anytime a member of the panel has a question about expenditures or wants to make the case for one, a perfectly reasonable way to approach this is to send me a letter detailing the who, what, when, where, why, how, so that I have a basis on which to make inquiry and then consult with the panel and make a decision. So that's what I would commend to you in the interim as a way forward. That's all I had, sir.
No, thank you for clarification there. And I hadn't thought about contacting you directly, but I understand the process now a good deal better than I did.
And and now that we've gone through this, it occurs to me that when you were crowned chair, Steve, we probably should have then, planned to have an orientation for you, but now we have the benefit of being able to sweep David into that orientation as well.
Sure.
As a new panel member. So it's time for us to be talking about this again.
Very
at
good.
the next meeting.
We'll take that up. Very good.
Okay.
Our next agenda item, it's on there, for the state nuclear engineer and panel to report on the spent fuel policies principles working group. I'm not sure what that all entails, but Tony, take it away.
Okay. I do have some notes on this for myself, so I don't forget anything. So if you see me looking down, it's because I'm referencing my notes. So basically what has happened, and Lissa alluded to some of this, San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, which is about halfway between Los Angeles and San Diego on the California coast, is in the process of decommissioning. The plant was shut down in 2013, and they've, their process is moving a little more slowly, I think. But one of the issues they have is that the bulk of their spent fuel from units 2 and unit 3, which shut down in 2013, have been placed in underground or vaulted storage. That they actually have 2 different storage systems on site. But the bulk of the spent fuel right now is actually in what was the footprint of the original unit. And as Lissa pointed out, it is literally right on the coast. Now, it's not 100% at sea level. It's a little bit higher than sea level, but really not all that much. So the other driver that they have is, believe it or not, the land that San Onofre is situated on is not owned by the utility, Southern California Edison. It's actually land rented from the United States Marine Corps because it is on the edge of Camp Pendleton. So what has happened is that the Department of Defense, and particularly the Navy, which has oversight of the Marine Corps, has said to Southern California Edison, is like, well, as you guys complete, decommissioning and dismantling what remains of the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, we want the fuel off site too. We don't want it sitting there. So this has triggered some work and work from the San Onofre Citizens Engagement Panel, Southern California Edison, and some of the local governments in the area to try to take some action on getting the spent fuel moved. And apparently what has happened is, as the congressional delegation in the immediate area and company officials and panel officials have discovered, is that when they approach Congress about this, the reaction is, well, you guys are the only people asking about this. Are there other communities interested in getting their spent nuclear fuel moved out of their communities once the plant decommissions? So what this prompted was that initially Southern California Edison, as sponsoring the San Onofre Citizens Decommissioning Engagement Panel, began reaching out to individual panels across the country. And apparently several other stakeholders as well. So back in January, I was contacted and I said, well, okay, this sounds interesting, but let's get the panel leadership for the Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel involved. So Steve, Lissa, and I had a preliminary meeting with some of the people from San Onofre and their Citizens Engagement Panel on what they were proposing. And mostly what I've just described now is what came out of that particular meeting. But subsequent to that, the San Onofre panel has moved forward with engaging with other groups. And initially what I thought was another one-on-one meeting, I believe this would have been in like mid-March or something like that, actually turned out to be I joined the meeting just to see what was going on. And it turns out that this was a meeting of several panelist representatives, as well as a number of other stakeholders, such as some tribal representatives, and some local government officials, mostly in the California area, but there were other officials from other parts of the country as well. And I nominally call this, since I didn't have a name for it at the time, I called this the Spent Fuel Policies Principles Working Group. But apparently their official name right now is the Community Seeking Solutions to the Spent Fuel Crisis. And what the two meetings of this group now have done is basically they discuss some general policy items that maybe everyone could agree on. So they gathered a little bit of information in their first meeting on what they felt other groups around the country would be interested in. And then in the second meeting, they presented a draft summary of these proposals for the entire group to consider. Now, individuals have provided comments on this, but they're not quite ready to have the entire paper available publicly. But as Lissa has indicated, what is coming is the group intends to release several positions or positions on several items that can be taken back to individual citizen advisory panels, and then the citizens advisory panels individually can decide whether or not they want to support these positions. And by supporting these positions, the expectation would be is that the panels would go to their respective state governments and to their congressional delegations and say, hey, look, we need an answer on these several specific items regarding decommissioning and spent fuel policy. So the items that they seem to be focusing on right now, but I have not seen final wording yet, would be one calling for an autonomous organization to manage the national spent fuel inventory. Now, this is something that goes back to the Blue Ribbon Commission from the Obama administration. This was one of their recommendations. This would be in line with that. The other items that they believe everyone can, all stakeholders can agree upon is a request for reliable and adequate funding to support interim storage. Another item is going back and pursuing multiple permanent repositories. Right now, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act states that the only permanent repository is Yucca Mountain. But also, too, the Obama administration and now the Biden administration have stated that, well, this is unworkable with the host state and some of these surrounding communities. Some of the immediate communities are in favor of receiving the funding, but that isn't the case throughout all of Nevada. And we start to see that in other areas, even with interim storage proposals that say, for example, it in New Mexico, the Eddy Lee County Alliance, which is where Holtec's facility would be posted or would be located, they're in favor of it, but a large part of the rest of New Mexico is not, and is on the record as stating so. So there's that. There's also a call for active engagement of state and local governments and some type of redefinition of the links between interim storage and permanent storage. Now, this is an area that last point, that's an area where I think there's going to be a lot of disagreement when you get down into, well, what should that linkage be? But regardless, what I believe will be proposed is a call to really re-examine that linkage again. And the last item, and this again, I think will be a controversial one, is whether Department of Energy would have federal title to spent fuel stored in private facilities. Right now, the two facilities being proposed, one in Texas, one in New Mexico, would be private interim storage. The question there, if I understand it correctly, is that whether that fuel would remain as the property and the responsibility of the interim storage facility owners, or would it turn over to Department of Energy responsibility? And that is something, I mean, I really don't know what to tell you on this, other than it will be a large battle when that comes to that point. But right now, one of the proposals is requesting that the federal government look at that. So that's kind of what I have in a nutshell right now. The biggest point to make here is that the whole point of this organization, confederation, whatever you care to call it, is that to appeal to more congressional delegations to kind of get the ball rolling on getting answers to these questions. So that's about all I have on that. I'm hoping that in the next few weeks, the policy paper that is coming out will be declared that, yes, okay, this is the final form of it. At the very least, I would like to get this out to panel members. And also, too, I would like to make it available on the panel's website. But of course, before I do that, I want to make sure that the people putting this together and leading this effort are fine with the paper being out in public record. So,
well, Tony, I think you made it public right now.
Well, this is, but we don't have the wording on it right now.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what I'm expecting will be in there, just based on the discussions and some of the drafts I've seen. But the draft is still evolving.
Yes.
So,
well, they had asked
some of
us
these points may disappear. So,
I guess just to wrap it up, should we put on the warn for the next meeting that there could be this information provided, because we probably have it before then, and have a vote to see if we want to join that coalition or not, or something? I mean, we had a vote years ago that we didn't want to take a policy position on any of this because we didn't have enough information. But if that's something, they wanted David Victor, I think his name is, the head of the whole head of the, I don't know what his position is, but he heads up essentially maybe like Corey's position with no,
I can clarify that.
They asked us if he could come and address the full panel about this coalition that would push the federal congressional delegations to act. That's what this is about. So if that's the case, he would like to come and address the full panel and take time out of a full panel discussion and provide that policy position ahead of time for the panel to look at. That's what they were asking.
Yeah, just to clarify, just so you know who David Victor is, David Victor is actually the chair of the San Onofre Decommissioning Citizens Engagement Panel. Now, unlike our panel, the San Onofre panel is something that was organized by Southern California Edison, the owner of the San Onofre site, which that particular paradigm is more common in decommissioning panels than a state organized panel.
Yes.
So I don't know if David Victor, Dr. Victor, he is a political science professor at, I believe, San Diego State University, and he's chaired the San Onofre panel since it was formed in 2013. Whether he'll actually have the time to speak to our panel remains to be seen. But I think this is a way to get the items out that he would like to speak to a broader audience too, is my understanding. Well, that's my take on what's happening here. Your take could be different. So.
Thank you, Tony. Commissioner Tierney, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. A couple things. I think we need to distinguish between bringing the panel here up to speed on the work, and to that end, I think we need to see the paper when the paper is final before we can also start making judgments about whether and what to vote on. So I would urge one at a time. With that said, Tony, perhaps you could clarify a little bit again, because I couldn't follow it. What exactly your role has been in this, not anybody else's, and if you can give me some comfort as to whether you have been representing the state of Vermont in any of this work. So maybe you could go over that again for me, please. Thank you.
Mostly what I have done in these meetings is I've sat in to understand what they're doing.
Okay, so you've been monitoring.
Yeah.
And how did you come to be monitoring the meetings?
I received a meeting invitation.
And how did you get that?
That was something that was the panel reached, or I should say representatives from San Onofre and the San Onofre Citizens Engagement Panel reached out to me.
Okay.
My email is public record. So.
Yeah. And do you recall in what capacity they reached out to you? Did they reach out to you in the capacity as a liaison to this panel, or did they reach out to you in your capacity as the state nuclear engineer, an employee of the department? Do you recall? Because the two are very different.
I think initially it was as a liaison to this panel, and at the very first of this, I did reach out to the panel leadership so that they could join in. And at the initial touch base on this, Lissa as vice chair, Steve as panel chair were there.
Okay, great. I'm satisfied then. Yeah. When you and I have a chance, let's catch up a little bit back at the office. Okay.
Yeah. Because I know we're on an edge here, and I've alerted San Onofre to this, as saying, hey, look, if we start talking policy, I can't be the representative.
And I just want to explain for the panel's benefit, what I'm trying to suss out is the role that the panel plays and the function that Tony serves in facilitating not just the meetings and the logistics, but also in helping, say, the subcommittee that Lissa chairs sort of move forward in a concerted direction by giving, guidance and trying to help them to resources and that sort of thing. That's what I consider to be his liaison function for the panel. And that makes sense to me for him to have been monitoring these sorts of things. Then there is Tony's official position as an employee of the department, and meaning as a state nuclear engineer. And there I have to, keep an eye on what the scope of his duties are. And they are not identical to what he does as the NDCAP liaison. And so that's why I'm asking him these questions. And so that we also as a panel have a clear understanding of the source of the information that has just been conveyed to us today, because it just wasn't clear to me. So thank you for clarifying, Tony.
I'd like to thank everyone for that discussion during this period. I found some of it to be things I didn't know about yet. The next item on our agenda are general public comments to the panel. And I would open them up to open discussion up to the general public, of whom there are quite a few people actually right now, as to whether you all have any comments or I don't know whether comments include questions or not, but certainly might be able to answer something for you. You can click your raised hand button there if you want to. I'm looking at my screen here and don't see anything yet. Going once, going twice. Sold, I guess. No comments. I'm not pleased about having no comments, but I'm glad that people are absorbing enough materials so that they feel satisfied, I guess. Do use the public comments period to express questions or concerns about certain things. That's what that section is for. And then I guess finally, we now are at the juncture, and perhaps a little bit earlier than I anticipated, but early is better than late, right? I'd like to mention that we have a meeting wrap up. Our next meeting is what date again, Tony?
The next.
Excuse me.
Hold on, I know it's in September, and I swear.
Yeah, I thought it was in September.
Yes,
I just couldn't remember.
Too much has been running through my head right now. I have to go to the website to check this, because I don't want to. I don't want to say the wrong date.
Well, that's all right. Check your Tony does a wonderful job in putting material on the website.
Yes.
There's gobs of it to digest, and so do look at the website. There's all kinds of new things there and old things too.
Yes, the next meeting is Monday, September 18th.
Very good.
For the full panel.
Yeah.
As has been discussed here tonight, there are two Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee meetings coming up now, June 12th and June 19th.
Very good. Okay. If there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Let's adjourn.
Pardon me?
So moved.
I'm sorry, I didn't. Oh, so moved. All right, very good. And I imagine there's a second. All those in favor?
I second. So moved is the second.
Okay, and all those in favor of adjourning? The time is, what time is it?
8:13 is what I'm saying.
8:13.
Wow. That's got to be a record.
I'd like to, well, I don't know if it's
close.
That's not always a good thing, but at any rate, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. I'd also like to have folks remember that there is a lot of information to review prior to the meetings, and as well that's available online. Please avail yourself of the website if you have access to the internet, and I certainly have been benefited from it tremendously. I've gotten up to speed in a number of areas, and I do appreciate the efforts that the department has provided there on the website area. It's been very, very helpful. So thank you, and if there's nothing else, have a nice evening.